Hi, I'm Paul. I work as an engineer at Arup. One of the tasks that I work on part of my time is support for the modern built environment knowledge transfer network. As part of that, we recently ran this survey. Essentially, the idea was to look at what the state of knowledge and action was in the built environment industry, what people were actually doing, what they sort of saw as the barriers to action. Just a quick introduction to the MBKTN, the knowledge transfer network. My work's part of the climate change adaptation group. There's 4 groups that I can't remember the names of at the moment, but that's one of them. Delivery team made up of people from Arup, Syria, BRE and Istria. Arup and Syria tend to lead on the climate change adaptation stuff. And we're sort of over here in this work plan undertaking 2 surveys. So I'm going to talk about the first survey, which was looking at sort of the wider MBE-KTN group of people that were interested, that were registered on the website and some of the other related KTNs. But there was also a second survey in parallel, which was companies that took part in the design for future climate projects to see how they sort of developed their awareness over the course of those projects. And if you're interested in information about that, I can give you contact details. So our survey ran from December until February. It was an online-based survey. We've got 135 responses. The vast majority of those came through the Technology Strategy Board's Connect platform, where we have a website. We did send out targeted emails to people as well and advertise it on social media, but I think possibly we were overlapping quite a lot with the Connect website. So yeah, almost all of them came through Connect. In terms of who we ended up getting responses from, so the majority were consultants. Just remind myself how many. I think it's about 34%. Yeah, 43% were consultants, 33% were researchers, and 13% clients. I think one of the things that came away with was it would be nice to hear from some more of the contractors and clients, look at more at the demand side of things. In terms of where they were based, London, South East came out quite heavily biased towards that, and the Midlands. I think that's just a reflection of the people that are members of the Connect site. And types of organisations, generally businesses, quite a lot of academia and government, slightly smaller groups. So in terms of what people understood about what climate change adaptation was one of quite interesting results in terms of most of what came out was things that probably agree would be climate change adaptation, adapting to be more resilient, accommodating new weather patterns, that sort of thing. There was quite a small number, and possibly less than we expected, that were mixing up climate change adaptation with climate change mitigation. We had done a survey 2 years ago with many of the same questions, and this is one of the ones where things seem to have improved in terms of people are more aware of what actually adaptation is rather than mitigation. In terms of things people associate with climate change adaptation, this again is looking at sort of understanding. There's a few phrases there that we thought maybe things like long life, loose fit, that possibly to people working at our end were a bit more familiar, but obviously haven't really caught on with the people we were surveying. Fairly positive in terms of, we set out 3 statements, whether the stakeholders feel that climate change lies too far in the future to trigger investment. Generally, quite a lot of agreement that I think clients feel that it's sort of a future issue, maybe something they can invest in later down the line. But the other 2, responding to climate change impacts present a real business opportunity, quite a lot of agreement there, so people are now starting to see that there is opportunities to invest and make economic sense of climate change adaptation, and also that there's not too much uncertainty anymore. So I think using sort of the current projections, people feel like they've got enough certainty to be able to act in a relevant way. In terms of expertise, most of the people we surveyed said they had expertise in both adaptation and energy efficiency, which brought up a slightly interesting question. We were asking whether they felt that energy efficiency and adaptation were linked, and the vast majority, 84%, said yes. There's a slightly worrying idea that reducing energy consumption through energy efficiency then sort of mitigates the need for climate change adaptation, which, while it does on a very sort of small scale, they're not quite linked to that extent. And there's a risk that people feel that because they've invested in energy efficiency, they've done their bit and they don't need to then work on adaptation. Whereas there is a need to implement climate change adaptation strategies to deal with things that are unavoidable at this stage. In terms of what people saw as the risks, flooding came out pretty highly. I think that's possibly because it was the end of last year and everywhere was flooded. Energy demand for cooling and overheating, and availability and management of water came out pretty highly. So, and they tend to match up quite well with sort of the UK climate change risk assessment, things like that. So people seem to have a good idea of what the major risks are. The less perceived risks, subsidence, driving, rain, effectiveness of green spaces. I think that's sort of, they're more difficult to predict. And also, well, subsidence is fairly regional. Driving rain is quite difficult to predict in terms of what's available at the moment. Effectiveness of green spaces was one, they got quite a lot of feedback in terms of people didn't really understand what that was in terms of why does climate change have an effect on what your green space does for you. And energy demand for heating seems to be quite low risk, although potentially we still have very cold winters coming up. Number of people that actively consider climate change in their projects quite high, about just over 2/3 of people that responded, and a fair chunk of them said that they actively consider them in 80% or more of their projects. So it is something that's being included in a lot of work that's going on, I think.
Do you think that's a fair reflection?
Well, I mean, the survey is slightly self-selecting because we were asking people that are in areas that are already interested. So yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see how that then reflects on the wider industry. And that's a fair point. It's quite interesting that you could argue it's quite interesting then that people that are interested in sort of modern built environment are not interested or are not including adaptation in projects.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of the things that when compared against the survey we did 2 years ago, it's something that's improved. And people are doing more now than they were just 2 years ago. The main things that they are commonly assessing, cooling, heating and flooding, I think that's partly because the tools for that are quite freely available. There's the Environment Agency tools on flooding and things like CP09 for overheating. Availability of water, despite coming out with quite a high perceived risk, wasn't one that people are using projections to predict so much. So that's possibly something that highlights a need for more guidance on that sort of area. These are the people that said they don't include adaptation in their projects. On the positive side, a lot of people said, 2/3 of them were saying that in the next 5 years they think they will need to start including it in their projects. The ones that said sort of 6 to 10 or 11 plus years mainly replied that it's sort of an economic argument that they can't make at the moment to their clients in terms of this is going to add expense to your project. So at the moment they don't feel confident in doing that. The ones that said never, that was mainly down to the type of work they do, so short-term projects that don't expect climate change to have a big impact over the lifetime. Yeah.
Isn't this in conflict with the previous work?
So this is only people that said no to do you active.
So that's only
Yeah, sorry, to make that clear. Yeah, so this is just a breakdown of people that said no. We asked them then when they expect to need to start including adaptation. We asked what the main resources were being used, and we got a very wide variety of answers, and it was quite inconsistent in a way. UK CIP, UK CP09 resources came up very frequently, 2017 went down, but then it drops off very rapidly. So the next one, the flood risk map, just came up 5 times, and DEC resources, 50 guides, the passive homes, planning, that's the one. Just say 4 or 5 times is so there didn't seem to be an answer that came up as in a set of resources that people used a lot, other than UK CP09. Then it was sort of a couple of people said web-based resources, a couple of people would have these. So there doesn't seem to be an industry standard in terms of I'm doing adaptation, these are the resources I use. In terms of what people said they needed, while they're using UK CP09, quite a lot of people said they didn't really understand it that well, and some more accessible sort of bolt-on user interfaces would be were quite in demand. More reliable projection for physics and updated building standards. I think that was, people felt that they're using the building standards as sort of a guide to how to design to a certain level, and that including things like adaptation in the building standards would help guide that. One of the nice things was an innovation behaviour change platform as part of, or similar to the technology strategy board, because actually that was something that we're looking at the moment, and also guidance on financial benefits of climate change adaptation, another thing we're looking at the moment. But I think that bottom one came up a lot in terms of people think that they can make a case, or it's possible to make a case for adaptation in that it does make economic sense, but they're not confident in the data that backs that up. This was our, so we gave a list of documents and resources that were sort of promoted through the technology strategy board to ask whether people used them, whether they were useful. Worryingly, most of them people said they'd never heard of. UK CIP came up quite frequently as one people had heard of and used, which is helpful, and the climate change risk assessment was heard of and used, but a lot of the other ones, essentially, most people said they hadn't heard of them. So in terms of how useful are they, there's a lot of NA. UK CIP came out as being the most useful, and the climate change risk assessment useful, but it's quite difficult to make any sort of comment on them because of so few people that actually heard of the resources. So I think the main thing that highlights is the need for promotion of the relevant resources to people that are working on these projects. How much this was sort of how much of a priority are the climate change risks? Generally a medium priority. We asked them about what they saw as potential opportunities in terms of making it more of a priority for their clients. So they came back with increased client base. The competitive advantage, came up quite a lot. If your company is doing it now, it gives you sort of a head start, because quite a lot of people saw it as something that's going to happen, and a lot of the academic answers were, it gives you access to more research funding.